Welcome to Comment with me, George Galloway, here on Press TV, still the voice of the voiceless. Comment is the big conversation. It's the great debate, but it can only be a debate if you join in. That's why, above all, I need your telephone calls on 44-208-601-4555. You call us, we'll call you back, establish a clear line, and remember, if you get on the television with me, the volume on your television has to be down at 0, or I'll have to move on because no one will understand either of us. Or you can SMS me on 447800008066, or email me at comment@presstv.co.uk. Tonight, of course, we're discussing Syria. The Geneva peace talks have begun. They seem to have gotten off to a bad start. Indeed, an early sign that they had headed off down the wrong track came when we learned that the Geneva peace talks were not in fact in Geneva, but in Montreux, a town about an hour away. They may move to Geneva, they may get back on track, but early signs are not good. First of all, Iran, one of the most important countries in the region, and an important ally of one of the parties in the war, namely the official government of Syria, was disinvited from the conference, having earlier been invited by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations being the organization whose conference it is. You would have thought, therefore, that the word of the Secretary General on who would be attending would be final. Not so. On a threat of veto and on the threat of themselves pulling out, a tiny, and I mean really tiny, car park of a country in the Persian Gulf threatened to pull out, exercised a veto, and hey presto, the great ancient civilization of Iran, with more than 70 million of a population and with a clear locus in the conference, was disinvited in favor of the small petrol station masquerading as a country. You couldn't make that up. It is absolutely illogical, irrational, and defies any kind of understanding that Iran would be excluded from peace talks about bringing about a ceasefire and a political process in Syria. But that's what they have done. Then there was the Secretary of State of the United States of America opening his contribution to the conference with an absolute declaration that the president of Syria could no longer be the president of Syria. As if the president of Syria could be chosen from Nebraska or Los Angeles rather than Syria itself. Moreover, the question of the resignation of the president of the Syrian Arab Republic isn't even on the agenda of the talks. Little Willie Hague was there, wagging his tail like a prize poodle, but then that's exactly what he is. So, some totally unimportant people were there, and some very important people were not. And it's a very odd situation where President Rouhani of Iran can be at Davos, center stage, with the whole world waiting on what he had to say, but Iran cannot be at the Syrian peace talks. So what outcome do you hope for from the talks? I know what outcome I hope for from the talks, and it's an end to the bloodshed. But that will require those who are paying for the bloodshed to agree to end it. And lo and behold, The people who are paying for the bloodshed are the very people saying that Iran cannot attend the peace talks. So that's question number one. What outcome do you hope for from those talks? And is the war in Syria a battle for freedom? Or is it just divide and conquer? Is it just a means of destroying Syria as Iraq was earlier destroyed, as a precursor to the destruction of any important, united, wealthy, civilized Arab country? Is it the hope on the part of the powerful and their attack dog Israel to have not 23 Arab countries but 233 Arab Emirates that can be set against each other, sold weapons to, that can be encouraged to have conflicts with each other, the better to stay divided and to be robbed of that which God gave them? I'm giving you a kind of hint of what my answer to that question is. Is the battle in Syria for freedom? In which case, why are countries in the Persian Gulf, where there is no freedom of any kind at all, so involved in it? Or is it an attempt to divide, conquer, and destroy Syria? Niall is always worth hearing. He's in Ireland, but he wants to talk about Geneva. Niall, welcome back to the show, my friend. Niall, you're on the air.
Okay, George. I'm just calling in relation to...
I thought we had Niall in Ireland.
Yeah, I'm here.
We seem to have lost him. Well,
I'm here, George.
Yes, Niall, you're on the air. Go ahead.
I lost you there for a second. Yes, I'm just calling in about the conference in Geneva, and I'm very, very, disillusioned, but also very pessimistic on the outcome of the entire event. I think you raised some very, very interesting points there in your summation, in your opening summation of the topic. First of all, it's Iran. And the exclusion of Iran is basically it's setting up the conference to fail straight away because Iran is a major power play, a major mover, and is a major contributor to events in the Middle East. You know, George, it's a bit like setting up the Yalta conference without the Soviet Union. It just doesn't make any sense there.
No, it's completely illogical, irrational, and apparently designed to make the conference fail.
Exactly. And the second point I want to make is, George, is the statement by John Kerry when he says that Assad's any issue or any agreement, settlement that will come at the end of the conference is that Assad must go. Yeah. Well, you know, George, the only people that can judge that are the Syrian people, not Mr. John Kerry in Washington or William Hague in London or Mr. Francois Hollande in Paris, but the Syrian people and the Syrian people themselves. The last point I want to make is in the nature of the opposition. Who are the opposition? What mandate they have? I mean, George, when you have a greater part of the opposition in Syria, the so-called opposition in Syria, backed by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Bahrain, Qatar, and to a lesser extent the West, hacking off people's heads, cutting their throats and eating their livers. I mean, who do you talk to? How do you get an overall settlement to end the conflict? And that's why I'm saying the entire thing is set up to fail.
Well, I agree with that. And Francois Hollande can get back on his motor scooter and do whatever it is he does of an evening. Little Willie Hague, the poodle, can get back in his kennel. And John Kerry, the big palooka, can say what he likes. But the only people who will decide who's the next president of Syria and who should remain or otherwise the president of Syria today are the Syrian people. No foreigner can sit there in Geneva and state that so and so cannot be the president of Syria. And by making the statement that he did, he ran the risk of the Syrian delegation getting up and getting out and on the plane to continue the war that they say they want to bring to an end. Cameron and Haig have made it clear they want, they said, to bring about an end to the bloodshed. So why would you go to a conference with an opening demand that can only mean that the war would continue? Niall in Ireland, always a pleasure, as indeed it is, to talk to Robert in Scotland on the same subject. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hello again, George.
Hi.
Regarding the Geneva II conference, I believe that once again we will fail to see a resolution. First off, it seems the so-called Syrian, so-called national, so-called coalition wasn't in any mood to deal with the government of Syria without getting the Islamic Republic of Iran out of the way, because they probably wouldn't like one of the most powerful voices in the Middle East that happens to be on the side of the government and has been exceptional in its support having any role in it. It also seems to me that it is hypocritical to invite the Arab League, who have a long history of massacring their own people, to a conference about peace. For me, at least, that is just not completely nonsensical. I also feel that the balance is tipped in favour of the rebels. We have at least 6 countries, plus the Arab League, who all support the rebels attending, and at least 3 countries that support the government attending. And I don't believe that uninviting Iran to the talks will do the talks any favours.
No, I'm certain that it won't. I mean, all sorts of weird and wonderful actors have strolled onto this stage. I mean, Norway and Sweden and Denmark are at the conference, but Iran has not been allowed to attend the conference. This is a kind of madness. Now, the so-called Syrian, so-called national, so-called coalition, whose armed wing is the so-called free, so-called Syrian, so-called army, which isn't actually free, which is only tangentially Syrian, and isn't an army because it's just been whipped by the al-Qaeda armies that have now taken possession of all of its weaponry, are not the people with whom any Syrian government is going to be able to reach a negotiated settlement with. But that doesn't mean there are not people in Syria who are in the opposition, who are in the patriotic, democratic, unbought, unpurchased opposition, who will have to be negotiated with, and a transition to a new form of state and government in Syria will have to emerge. And if it doesn't emerge from Geneva, well, it's going to have to emerge somehow, some way. Our man, Roshan Mohammed Saleh, who was in this very spot just last week, he's watching the talks in Geneva. Roshan, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
Well, good, thanks. It hasn't looked an edifying spectacle thus far from here. How does it look to you up more close?
Well, I thought the Syrian delegation was very kind of confident, and they managed to get their message across quite effectively yesterday. I thought a very direct speech by Walid al-Muallem, the foreign secretary, the foreign minister of Syria, which actually brought gasps from the journalists that I was watching it with. You know, the stridency of his language, calling the opposition at the talks traitors and agents, and really laying into Saudi and Qatar and Turkey for exporting terrorism, helping al-Qaeda spread, helping Wahhabism spread, and also laying in the West for kind of, you know, talking about human rights and democracy while secretly supporting the slaughter in Syria. And I think the Syrian delegation, I think their confidence at the talks yesterday and the stridency of their language reflected their feeling that they're winning. They're winning on the battlefield and they're winning politically. And they have a united political and military leadership at the moment. And therefore, why would they need to make any concessions whatsoever? So I think they kind of of, they really hammered home the point that the presidency is a red line. Assad will not be leaving. He will not be stepping down. They were angry that Iran wasn't invited to the conference, and they were angry that the conference wasn't focusing on the issue of terrorism, which they feel is the main issue today. The opposition, on the other hand, I thought they cut quite a sorry bunch, really. They didn't look like they really wanted to be there. I think they were forced to be there by the big powers. They obviously concentrated on, Assad must go and human rights violations taking place. But the thing with the opposition in the talks yesterday, they have no authority over the fighters on the ground. In fact, a lot of the fighters on the ground, the al-Qaeda types, the Islamist types, believe they're traitors for going to the talks in the first place. So I think the Syrian delegation would probably be better negotiating directly with the big powers, who are really the major players on the ground in Syria, rather than a bunch of nobodies like the Syrian opposition in Geneva.
There's a paradox within that, though, Roshan, because it's true, and we all saw it. The big powers did force the Syrian opposition to go there, but it seems unclear as to why. Because what's the point in forcing them to go there if their conduct there and the line they're going to follow there cannot possibly solve this crisis?
Well, I think it's window dressing, George. I think they know that the Ahmed Jaber and the Syrian National Council don't really carry any weight politically or militarily, but I think they need to pretend that they are working with Syrians and that Syrians should be negotiating with Syrians. In reality, these people have no power. It's Qatar that has the power, it's Saudi that has the power, it's Turkey that has the power, it's the West that has the power. But it's a sort of window dressing. But I have to say that I think the big powers do want some kind of deal. I think they're concerned about the spread of al-Qaeda, the potential for blowback on places like Turkey and eventually maybe even the West. So they do want to enter some kind of negotiations with the Syrian government, who seem to have the ascendancy now. But I must admit, I was a little bit concerned yesterday by the stridency coming from nations like the US and Turkey, especially. I thought Turkey was changing its position slightly. Yes. And from what I heard yesterday from the Turkish Foreign Minister, I don't think that's the case, because they were very, very adamant that it was the Assad tyranny, in their words, that was to blame for this whole crisis. They will continue to support the Syrian people, as they put it. Assad must go. And the US was saying the same thing, and they were saying that we are actually going to increase support to the Syrian opposition. So I think that although it is true that the Syrian government now is in the ascendancy militarily and politically, I think it's also true that total victory is probably not possible in the near term. That makes me concerned that this is actually going to carry on for many years yet.
Thanks very much, Roshan Mohammed Saleh, watching the talks in Geneva. Ahmed is in London on the same subject. Ahmed, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
I can. You're on the air, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, George. George, I want to say by starting that, you are like a role model. I cannot even describe, the courage and the things which you have inserted not only in me but into a lot of youth. You are a very brave man.
Thank you, sir.
It shows in your everything. In your speech, the way you carry yourself, everything. And we were apolitical, and because of you, I'm 29 years old. Because of you, I'm very political now. And being political is good because, I'm aware about a lot of stuff. So thank you very much, not only from me, but from a lot of my friends. And I would say the credit goes to you.
Thanks,
now, coming to the issue itself, I was actually, I've watched most of your, speeches on YouTube and on your channels. They have been a great inspiration. In one of your speech, you said something which kind of hit the nail. We said that if we or the Arabs or people are united, then external parties cannot do anything. Mm-hmm. Now it's an unfortunate, and you have spent whole your life telling the youth and the audience into the Muslim world or on the east side saying that, we need to be together, we need to be united, and democracy is from the people within these countries to select their leaders, their governments, people who would rule them. I mean, it's unfortunate that, somebody as clear and somebody who comprehends things as easy and simple like yourself, they still cannot get through to the masses in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, in Southeast Asia, and unfortunately, they're still being divided and ruled. It's a shame, but, I just want to say that, thank you so very much for all the good work you've done. I cannot even tell you how much it means to normal people like me and how we will carry this whole our lives. We owe big time to you. God bless you. My biggest dream is to meet you one day, and inshallah, God willing, one day I'm definitely going to come and meet you as well.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. The issue of unity is the key. It seems to me so obvious that a blind man could see it, that the purpose of turning one set of Muslims against the other, of turning one Muslim country against another, is so obvious, it's impossible to believe that so many people fail to see it and fall into that trap. They want to divide the Muslims so that the Muslims will never be strong. They want the Muslims to be weak so that they can steal their things, so that they can set one against the other and sell weapons to both. They want the Muslims to be weak because a united Muslim world would lay proper claim to that which God gave to it. And that seems to me a message worth carrying. And I have tried to carry it all of my life. Bakir is in Denmark on the same subject of Geneva. Bakir, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George. I would say what that happened Monday night was shameful. It was unforgivable, as Foreign Minister of Russia said. And I would suggest Ban Ki-moon to resign because of his stupid decision to exclude Iran from the talks. And you can see what happened. Nothing is coming good out of the conference. And just to show what happened, what Walid al-Muallem did yesterday, as he ridiculed him.
I'll tell you what, Bakir, it's not just a very bad decision. It's an inexplicable one. Why did the Secretary General of the United Nations itself say that Iran should be at the talks and then tells Iran that they are now disinvited? They briefed the media that Qatar said that they would pull out of the conference if Iran attended. Why would Qatar say of its near neighbor that its relations were so bad with Iran, which they never say to Iran's face, of course, that they could not sit in the same Geneva conference hall as them? They can sit with all kinds of other people, even people utterly uninvolved in this conflict, but they can't sit with Iran. Why would Qatar do that? I think that's a very good question. Now, I happen to know that the regime in Qatar, which wasn't, I remind you, ever elected by anyone, ever. There is no freedom or liberty or democracy in Qatar of any kind at all. Neither has there ever been. I happen to know that Qatar has given $3 billion, $3,000 million to the so-called Syrian opposition. And that's why they were able to exercise a veto on the presence at the conference of an important regional superpower like Iran. Shokat's in Manchester. He's on the line now. Let's talk to him about Geneva. Go ahead quickly, Shokat.
Oh, hello there, George. Yeah, I'd like to make a quick comment. The two reasons I believe that Iran has been excluded from the Syrian conference.
I'll tell you what, Shokat, this is too important to cut you short. So I'm going to have to ask you to stay on the line, because right after a short news bulletin, I'll be back with the second part of comment. We're discussing Syria, the talks in Geneva, and what the real purpose of the war in Syria has been. So don't go away. There'll be more of comment here in just 3 minutes' time after a short news bulletin. Showkat, stay on the line. I want to hear what you have to say. Welcome back to Comment with me, George Galloway, on Press TV. We are still the voice of the voiceless, and tonight we're talking about Syria. What outcome do you hope for from the talks in Geneva, if they ever get to Geneva, and if they ever get to talking? And is the war in Syria really a battle for freedom, or is it just the old divide and conquer? Now, Showkat in Manchester came on the line briefly before the break. What he has to say is important, so I invited him to stay for the second half. Showkat, the whole floor, and indeed the world, is your oyster. Go ahead.
Thank you, George. Yeah, as I was saying before, the two reasons I believe that Iran has been excluded from these talks is because, one, the Iranians are very tough negotiators, and two, they are very good negotiators because they always seem to go into negotiations by agreeing what is in common with both parties before they start disagreeing.
Yes.
Can I make one more comment? And
yes, please do.
If there is not a peaceful resolution in Syria, it is very, very dangerous for the region and the world as it is.
Well, I'm glad you added that last point, because one of the least understood but increasingly recognized phenomenon at work here is this. If you make this big Frankenstein monster of more than 100,000 fanatic extremists, if you arm them to the teeth, if you fill their pockets full of money, if you fill their heads full of hate, and you give them all the training that comes from 3 years of war, when that war is over, whatever the outcome of the war, this monster is going to return to your country. And it's still going to have its head full of hate. It's still going to have its combat experience. It's still going to be imbued by this bristling, sectarian hatred of all that is different to them. And they're going to blow themselves up in your own cities, in your own underground trains, on your own buses, in your own restaurants. That's what they're going to do, because that's what they do, these people. And more, people are fearing, if this war goes on and on and on, more and more fanatics are going to be more and more dangerous, as you put it, to the region and the world. Even in Canada, where Doreen is on the line on the subject of Geneva. Doreen, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure.
Oh, hi, George, and good afternoon. Yeah, George, I don't have too much faith in this Geneva conference, because what I see is while all these meetings and peace meetings are going on, Israel keeps taking the Palestinian land. They keep building more settlements, and people are not interested in that. And I think the UN is run by the same people that run the United States and Canada, so that's quite obvious. I first saw that, George, in 2006, the UN, when there was a man there, Kobi Hanna, and when Israel bombed Lebanon, on Clock News, he came out and said they bombed peacekeeping that was clearly painted blue, a NATO building, and they bombed it. It's been there for 35 years. And I go, oh, and there was a Canadian killed. That was 2006. And that was at the 12 o'clock news. And by 6 o'clock, he changed his tune. And I don't know why. I go, oh, so that's when I knew there was something different. But I think what's happening, we have our Minister of Foreign Affairs, John Bird, speaking out at a meeting saying that he is going to, Palestinians are going to feel the consequences of Canada if they take Israel to the criminal court, the International Criminal Court. What can Canada do that Israel hasn't already done to the poor Palestinians?
Yeah.
That's what is wrong with that man? He insults people?
Well, it's not just him. I don't know if you saw that picture of Prime Minister Harper this week, literally bowing in front of Netanyahu, the leader of what they call Israel. It was one of the most shameful, almost surreal photographs I have ever seen. The Prime Minister of a great country in North America bowing in front of this mass killer, Netanyahu. And the government of Canada, from the Prime Minister downwards, has reduced your great country to little more than a foreign embassy of Israel. Whatever Israel wants, Canada will try to provide. It has no independent foreign policy towards the issue of Israel-Palestine at all. It is simply a method of transmission of the latest position of the most extreme right-wing Zionist hawks in Israel. They are more Israeli than the Israelis, more Israeli than many Israelis would like them to be. They're more Netanyahu, more Likud, even than many in the Likud. And I believe that one day, Doreen, we will realize exactly why the government of Harper and his party were such slaves to the Zionist state, the settler state. One day we'll know, because the truth will always out. I'm sure you know what I'm saying. Dimitrios is in Athens. He wants to talk about Syria too. Dimitrios, welcome to the show.
Good evening, George. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Can I begin by saying that you're the voice of reason in a sink of media propaganda over the Syrian war?
Thank you, brother.
Well, I'd like to start by saying that this is obviously a classic textbook case of a proxy war.
Yeah.
We had no business whatsoever, and I mean NATO and the United States, intervening in Syria in such a manner. The fallacy that we are promoting democracy and human rights there is absolutely ludicrous.
It's absurd.
There are places such as Saudi Arabia or even Egypt under Mubarak, where the West has been continually contributing to the suppression of minorities, to the suppression of political activists, and has been turning a blind eye to human rights abuses. In Syria, what the West is trying to do is carve up mini-states in order to control the resources of the country and prevent the existence of big nation-states commandeered by strong leaders as in the past, standing on their own feet, having their own voice, and opposing the Western agenda in the region. It is about weakening one of the few Arab states left with an independent foreign policy, not just in regards to Israel, but in regards to the whole of the region.
I mean, Dimitrios, I could not have put that better myself, and I won't try to. I just want to ask you one question. Once upon a time, in the quite recent past, a government in Athens would have been on the side of the righteous in the Middle East, would have been against the settler state, the Zionist entity, would have been with the Palestinians. But now Athens is either quiet or on the side of these devils. How did that happen? And what do the Greek people think about it?
Well, there has been continuous resistance against the current government foreign policy. Greek people do not like the settlements. They oppose the Iraq war. We never liked the Arab dictatorships in the region. Yet again, we never liked what the Israelis, the Zionist state, has been doing to the Palestinians and to the people of Gaza as well. However, things in Greece have been shifting drastically. If you remember, in the 1980s, our foreign policy had been one of non-alignment and promoting peace while opposing imperialism in the region. This is why Papandreou at that time was aligning himself with Yasser Arafat. However, his son, a mutated socialist leader, took over the country and, aligned us with Israel, and not just any Israel, the Israel of Netanyahu, the Israel of those that are trying to live up to the memory of Ariel Sharon, a war criminal, a person who, if he had been an Arab, would be surely sent to The Hague for war crimes.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed. Dimitros, this has been a great call. I've really enjoyed listening to you. I hope the viewers have too. Don't be a stranger. Come back soon. Farida is in London. She wants to talk about Syria and Geneva also. Farida, welcome back. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, George.
Good evening, madam. Go on.
I've been following the Geneva II peace talks, and with great pessimism, I must admit. But, George, we desperately wanted to hear some genuine Syrian voices. And even though Mr. Kerry thinks that he is the mastermind behind these so-called peace talks, I also have a feeling that at least it's a beginning, George, because war has never, ever solved the problems in the Middle East especially. So if we can get the people around the table, at least it's a beginning, even if it's a tenuous one. And I think Mr. George Kerry and his cronies, and especially Mr. Ban Ki-moon, who's just a stooge, have realized that they do not have the solution. What the only solace to me is that there are people who are trying to talk peace instead of blasting each other off. And it was very refreshing to hear the Syrian UN ambassador and Mr. Walid Amali. And I'm hopeful, George.
Well, I hope so, Farida, and I agree with you. I supported the talks, and I wish them well, of course. They've got off to a bad start, but they wouldn't be the first set of negotiations that got off to a bad start, but came to a satisfactory ending. So I'm certainly not writing off the process as yet. My overriding feeling about it is this, that the big Western powers are not actually sure what they want in this picture. They forced the opposition to go to Geneva, but it's not yet clear why. Because the conduct of both the Western powers and their satrapies in the Persian Gulf, their client states in the Persian Gulf, and the so-called Syrian opposition, the conduct of these actors has been such that they don't seem to want to be there. So if they don't want to be there, why did they go? If they didn't want Iran at the conference, why did they invite Iran? Having invited Iran, why did they disinvite it? So there seems to me evidence of confusion caused by, undoubtedly, this Frankenstein question that I keep talking about. You see, if they could have overthrown the regime in Syria without the Frankenstein monster that they have created becoming overwhelmingly powerful and more gigantic, then that would have been one thing. But now it's clear that almost all of the fighting in Syria is being carried out by al-Qaeda affiliates and other extremist fanatics. The question is begged, if we keep feeding this monster, it's going to get more and more dangerous, not just to the poor people of Syria and other countries in the region, Iraq and Lebanon, but also to the countries that are feeding them, including these satrapies in the Gulf and including places like ours in London. Farida, as always, thanks for the call. Simon is in South Sudan. He's always a pleasure to disagree with. He wants to talk about Geneva II. Simon, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
I think Syria Geneva Conference is a good move for the country, for the people of Syria. But what I see is wrong is the Western powers, the Western countries are denying the success of the Syrian government, and they are also in the other way around. They are not in what what's called UN to assist the conference in Syria, in Geneva. The first thing, US has rejected the call of Iran to join the Syrian conference in Geneva. This is what I see. It is wrong total. If it means what they are doing is business among the people of Syria. They wanted the war to continue so that they get money from Syria resources. They supply weapons and kill the center of Syria. Syrians are killing themselves because of money. I don't know where and how.
Of course, they can't do it without money, Simon. The fanatics are being funded. Their weapons are being bought and provided. Their wherewithal, what they wear, what they eat, how they live is being funded. But I don't think that they're doing it for money. They're mercenaries of a different kind. They're mercenaries in that they will fight for their takfiri extremist fanaticism anywhere at all. They don't recognize national governments, states, borders, maps. It's quite clear from the emergence, for example, of one of the several al-Qaeda affiliates in this war, that they want to make a state which is a mirror of their own vicious, nasty, sectarian interpretation of Islam in parts of Iraq, parts of Syria, and if they could, parts of Lebanon too. They don't care that this would tear apart three pre-existing countries and make the Muslims even more divided and weak than they already are. Simon, thanks for the call in South Sudan. Let's go to Spain and talk to Muhammad there. Muhammad, is the battle for freedom or is it a battle to divide and conquer? Discuss.
Hello, George.
Yes, welcome.
I want to talk about the Arabs.
Yes.
And first of all, I want to reward you. God talk about you in the Quran. If you look Quran 42 verse 50, God talk about you. So the Arabs, they're supposed to know what you are doing. You are not doing it for yourself. You do it for God send you to do all this. If you read Quran 42 verse 50, God talk about you. But secondly, what you are doing, God will reward you. But secondly, the Arabs, the reason why they don't want Iran, because God wrote it in the Quran that all the Arabs, they are hypocrites. It's in the Quran. When you look Quran 9, verse 96, God talk about the Arabs. That is why it's very, very difficult for the Arabs to cooperate, because the Arabs, they are hypocrites. God knows about them. That is why God said. So everything they are doing in the world, Arabs, they are hypocrites. They cannot unite because God knows them. That is why God said it in the Quran. So Iran, they are not Arabs. That is why Iran, they are very, very, everybody likes Iran in the world.
Well, Muhammad, of course, yes. I'm very grateful for the kind words that you said about me. But of course, the Quran doesn't say that the Arabs are hypocrites. It says that the hypocrites are hypocrites. The hypocrites that the Prophet was talking about, in the words of God, happen to be Arabs. But 360 million Arabs are not hypocrites. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of Arabs are not hypocrites. The problem is there are enough hypocrites amongst the Arabs to divide the nation, which could be one and could be at the center of a worldwide Muslim ummah, almost 2 billion strong. And wouldn't that be a fine thing? But you're onto something here, Mohammed, because Doreen in Canada attacked verbally Israel, making use of this current situation to steal still more Palestinian land. But why should we blame Israel for that? Scorpions sting because they're scorpions. Israel steals Palestinian land because it's Israel. The people to be blamed are the Arabs who are tearing each other to pieces, almost from the Atlantic to the Gulf. These are the people who should be blamed. And those, like Iran, who are trying to get them to unite and stop killing each other and face their real enemies, are boycotted and kept away from a conference that might otherwise have solved the problems. Last call, Julian in Reading. Julian, be quick. Go ahead, sir.
Assalamualaikum, George. I just want your opinion on something. Last week I was on 1 FM and we were discussing, as I call them, the Brits abroad, or you say that the Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
That is these British citizens who have been fighting in Syria and are now coming home.
Yeah.
What should their fate be when they reach British soil?
Well, two of them are charged just last Saturday. Two young men from Birmingham have been charged, and of course their case is now going to go before the courts, so we can't prejudge that. But this will happen more and more. But of course, there will be many who come in and who evade the police at the airports. There will be many who steal their way back to the country or attack their own country or other countries overseas, that will reappear in a shopping mall. Just to give one example, in Kenya, being British citizens, but massacring innocent people. So my view is very clear. We should never have created this Frankenstein monster in the first place. We will rue the day that we did create it, and we'll have to defend ourselves by all means against any of the devil's work that these people seek to wreak upon us in the years to come. Julian, thanks for that last call in Reading. Thanks to everyone who called this evening. This issue, of course, will run and run. Geneva will run and run. Let's just hope that they don't run out of breath before the entirety of Syria is destroyed. If you liked it, come back next week. It's been marvelous.
Hello, if you just comment your name and the place you that number, and just make sure that your television volume's set to 0. So 0.